Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today I'm going to give you all a gift. The gift of the God's Bulwark build for your clerics, for you out there who really want to play your cleric as a frontline martial character rather than as a caster cleric, because, you know, what nerd wants to use spells as a cleric? No. We're going to be up on the front line, hitting things as much as possible. I find this dichotomy to be very interesting. Yes, give me a spellcaster, but also let me hit things. Like, the sheer amount of people out there who want to play casters that hit things is insane. Why not just play a martial character who multi-class archetypes or whatever into a caster? Then you're good at the thing you want to be good at, and you have a little bit of spell casting on the side. No, everyone wants to play a Gish. Everyone wants to play a wizard or a cleric or something who doesn't actually cast spells, or at least does, but also just hits things really good. People just want to stab a bitch. I think that's what it really is. I don't know. Anyway, today we'll be talking about the God's Bulwark build, which is a build designed for people who want to play their cleric as a frontline fighter. Yeah, I know. It's actually good, though. The Player Core 1, which, yeah, this video is a little bit late. Player Core 1 came out forever ago, but man, build videos are hard. It's hard doing something that I know people are going to love and hate both equally, because it's not going to be min-maxed, or they're going to want me to do everything or whatever. It's whatever. A lot of this video started off with me complaining a bit. Let's actually just get started. Well, actually, before we get started, let's talk about my shirt. So this channel is partnered with Into the AM. You can find a link down in the description below where you can get 10% off of any of the merchandise on their site. But specifically, I like this particular partnership for the graphic tees. I like this Viking shirt. It's see-through on the screen because for some reason it registers this blue as being green. I don't know why, but because I like this shirt a lot, and you can actually get 3 graphic tees for under $20 AT, which is insane because graphic tees are always super expensive, with a current deal they have going on where you can get 3 shirts for just a little over $60, but with my 10% discount, that actually drops it below $60, making it a really easy way to buy some shirts. I know several of you have already done so I figured I'd mention it again for anyone who has yet to do so. All right, shilling done. Let's talk about the build. So this build is designed for you to be unkillable, to be a frontliner for your party, to hit things with a weapon, or to dynamically be a frontline support where you can heal or give benefits. And it's very flexible. You don't really have to pick between one or the other. You can be situated for any kind of situation that comes your way. And so let's talk about the stats. So starting off with, we're actually going to be maxing out strength and con as much as we can at level 1. So that means our wisdom is going to be at a +2 max, which I recommend at least doing that much. It's okay. We don't need wisdom really for much of anything on this particular build. And if I was to say a dumb stat, if you're picking an ancestry, you know, intelligence is not going to be super necessary in this build. It uses 3 skills and no intelligence-based things. So strength, con, a little bit of wisdom, and then a 4th stat of either dex or charisma, your choice. I actually have a path builder down in the description below where you can see the build, and hey, you can open that up right now, follow along with the video as I explain my choices for the build. It does have some gaps. Fill it in yourself. You're a full grown adult maybe, or not. I don't know. Actually, I think most of my audience are 25 plus. So you're a full grown adult. You can fill in the blanks. There's not that many. I just didn't want to make every choice for you. Anyway, so With that stat lineup, that will put us in place, one, to have a lot of HP so that we're hard to kill, and two, so we can hit things more easily, which is a part of the build. So it's very important. Our wisdom is not going to play much of a factor. We're not going to be using spell DCs or spell attack rolls at all. This is a pure frontline tanky build that uses a lot of healing and buff spells. That's about it. So obviously this is going to be a War Priest Doctrine build. So you're going to pick the War Priest Doctrine, absolutely necessary. And you're going to want a deity that gives you a strong one-handed weapon that I recommend you either put the shove or trip trait on. Well, I guess you don't get to choose, but pick a god that has a good shove or trip weapon attached to it. And it needs to be a one-hander because we're going to be using a shield quite a lot. This is a standard sword and board build that is going to make our tankiness all the higher. Now, if I was to give a recommendation for a deity, I go with the Forge Father himself, Torag. A really good one in particular, but more importantly, gives you the Warhammer, a really good one-handed D8 weapon that has the shove trait. Your strength is going to be particularly high in this build, so honestly, as far as our skills are concerned, I would go with athletics as our primary skill to work with. And then in addition to that, I chose medicine and religion because, you know, who is going to roll religion but us? Medicine is actually pretty important for this build as well, and I know we kind of dumped our wisdom a little bit, but that's okay. You don't really need a super high wisdom for the medicine skill, if I'm being completely honest, though we will be boosting our wisdom as we go. So yeah, so one-handed, favored weapon, and then skills, athletics, medicine, and then your choice. I chose religion, but for the majority of the game, we're going to be boosting just our athletics and our medicine. Now, the early parts of the game are going to honestly be some of the most boring for you. You're going to probably take Bless in your available spell slots, at least for your first rank spells, and you're going to use our healing fonts. Oh yeah, by the way, your deity needs, I forgot this one major part, you need healing font. Healing font is absolutely necessary for this build, so make sure your deity gives you one. Again, Torag gives healing font, so not a bad choice. But the early game is going to be a little boring because we're going to bless ourselves so that we get a +1 to make up for our lack in strength, and then we're going to be using our healing to sustain us and the team with a shield to shield block and mitigate some damage. In fact, taking a little bit of crafting, even if you dump your intelligence, might not be bad because repairing your gear is probably going to be necessary. But, you know, you can always just buy more shields. They're really not that expensive, if I'm being honest. Our first feat that we're going to select is War Priest's Armor, and this is mostly just going to ensure our survivability on the front line. Higher AC means less likely chance to be crit, and it makes you less of a prioritized target for weaker enemies because they're going to be unable to hit you, you know, as often. So this just makes us really, really tanky, and thus the purpose of the build. So we're a frontliner wearing heavy armor, using a weapon, and then healing ourselves whenever we need to, or our allies. Also at level 2, I do recommend taking the battle medicine skill. Is again a good reason to have medicine. We're going to be using our heals mostly for ourselves through the build, which is a little bit selfish, but the point is we don't die as the front line for our team. So using battle medicine to treat wounds on our allies in combat is a good way to substitute the use of our healing fonts. It's a really good early game too. So level 2, we're pretty set survivability wise, and it'll be easy to get to at least the mid-range of the game. Speaking on the mid-range, level 4 is when things actually start picking up. Things get really interesting when we select Restorative Strike at level 4. Now, this is a really good feat because the major feature is it allows us to heal right in the face of the enemy without having to worry about any reactive strikes, as this one does remove the Manipulate trait from the heal that we cast in tandem with a melee strike. Now, this melee strike also gets a +1 status bonus to hit if we're using our deity's favored weapon, which we should be, and thus this puts us on par with the martial characters in our party, at least until next level, without needing to use the Bless spell. Now, granted, Bless is still really good, and it does buff our other teammates, But if you are the sole tank on your team, then, it's really good that you can hit enemies in addition to sustaining yourself. And if you have other martial teammates who are up in the front lines with you, if you're flanking an enemy, this is perfect because as long as your strike hits, you also give the healing amount that you gained to your ally as well. So not only are you sustaining yourself, but you're sustaining your ally as well. And the best part about this is at level 6, we're going to be picking up Divine Weapon. This is insanely good because as a free action after we cast a divine spell, we can buff our melee attack to do even more damage. And it's a free action that can take place in the middle of Restorative Strike. Free actions occur whenever their trigger happens. So we use Restorative Strike, we heal first, which then procs our Divine Weapon, and then when we strike with the +1 to hit, we do an additional D4 spiritual damage. Now, spirit damage is one of the least resisted damages in the game, which is insanely good. So we can hit it, and it gains Sanctification, so if our enemy, likely an unholy one, and we are holy, then we get to do even more damage. Now, Divine Weapon doesn't necessarily scale super well. It's only a D4 ever in the game, but it's a free D4 anytime we use a heal. And whenever we use Restorative Strike, which is going to be our main sustain tool for a majority of the game, it's really, really good to add on. And by this point, we've already got some stat boost and a general skill feat. For general skill feat, I recommend the skill feats of Toughness and Fleet. Whatever the order, I recommend Toughness first because it just increases your overall sustainability. And Fleet helps mitigate the armor bonus or the armor penalty we're going to have to our speed if we're wearing heavy armor, which we should be because we have the feat from level 2. So those are the ones I recommend. But for our stats, you're going to be focusing on well up until level 15, which will have a change on strength, con, wisdom, plus our either dex or our charisma. Dex for my build, maybe charisma for yours, whatever. Level 15, that will change. But until then, keep these 4 stats in mind. Another thing to mention at this point is at the level 5-6 range, we're actually going to fall behind our martial compatriots. That's only until level 7 when we get expert proficiency. So a couple levels being 1 point difference between the martial allies is really not a big deal at all. And honestly, with all the healing capacity and our general sustain on the battlefield, that's what you're trading for. If you want to be a martial character, play a martial character. You want to be a caster, I mean, the War Priest Doctrine does make you do a lot of martial things, but we're still a full caster at the end of the day. And honestly, that 1 point difference just means that you're going to be focusing more on the little mook enemies and not on the boss. Let your high damage dealers work on the boss. Maybe get your face in the way so you get hit a few times and then, sustain yourself with Restorative Strike. But your job isn't to do damage with this build. Your job is to be up in the front line and be unkillable. So as much as I'm sure your GM is going to love that, that is what we're aiming for with this build. And there are lots of good ways that you can also help enhance this feature by the use of certain items like mutagens, like the Juggernaut mutagen, for instance. So, you got a lot of cool things you can do with just being a tank on the battlefield. You don't need to do the high damage, but honestly, we're still pretty competitive with martials at this point, and as long as we're not hitting the boss, all the weaker enemies, we're going to be able to hit just as hard, and with like Divine Weapon and the like, we're going to be able to get that little damage steroid that can put us up a little bit above the rest of the group. At level 8, we get a really good feat with Zealous Rush. This is a reaction, and something to make mention of, this reaction will be something you're not going to want to use every time because we also are using shields and the shield block reaction, so you kind of have to pick and choose. But with Zealous Rush, as long as you're using a spell that targets either just you or your gear, which Heroism is a really good feat or a spell to be using to do this, you can buff yourself and then you can stride. If it's a one action, it's 10 feet. 2 action, it's your full stride action. The best part about Zealous Rush is it cleans up our action economy. It allows us to do things like buffing ourselves while moving to either engage at the beginning of a combat or to move from one defeated enemy to the next while, even healing ourselves or the like. A 2 action heal can give us a huge buff to our HP, and then Zealous Rush and because we're using a spell for this one, don't forget your divine weapon feat allows us to get an extra damage on our next strike in the round as well. It really helps us keep mobility on the battlefield, keep using our spells, and just overall, it's a really, really good action for this build. Or reaction, I suppose. Now, level 10, along with those stat boosts I mentioned before, we also are taking Heroic Recovery. Now, this is a spell shape which we will have a few of in this build, and this one is particularly really good because, to be fair, it's an extra action, but we can one action spell shape into a one action heal to give ourselves a little bit of healing and a bunch of stat boosts, a +5 status bonus movement 2 speed, which, hey, we could use a reaction to move with Zealous Rush, and Divine Weapon to give a damage bonus. Speaking on damage bonuses, by the way, we get a +1 status bonus to hit and a +1 status bonus to the damage roll of our strike until the end of our next turn. So a one action heal mixed with Heroic Recovery and Zealous Rush and Divine Weapon allows us to move, heal ourselves, amp our damage twice, and make it easier to hit an enemy. That's insane. That's really, really good. There's so many great ways that this works so effectively in this build that Heroic Recovery is good. And if you have to 2-action heal yourself because maybe you need a particularly big heal, then you can do so and then get all those buffs as far as next turn is concerned and still Zealous Rush if you really, really want to. It's all really good. And the best part about this is flexible. It can be used to heal an ally with a 2-action heal to give them all those buffs until the end of their next turn. It's a really good setup that we have here. So by level 8 or by level 10, we are already pretty much peak efficiency for this build. We're going to get some other really cool things a little bit later, but at level 10, we're pretty much as good as we can get for action economy, which is really good. Everything else is just going to be gravy on top. At level 12, I decided to go with Defensive Recovery. This one just augments kind of what I talked about before. It's another spell shape that we're pretty much going to be throwing onto a heal. But more or less what we're going to do is we can one action heal and use this to get a +2 status bonus to our AC. Now, if we pair this with also raising our shield, we get a full round of full defense boosting, giving us a +4 to our AC, and as well a +1 status bonus to any saves we need to make. This is a really good option if the fight is particularly difficult. And by this point in the game, we are getting to the point where the bosses are starting to hit or crit more often and are hurting a lot. So if you're the soul tank on your team, this is a really, really solid pickup. If you're an off tank, maybe you want to select a different feat. Maybe you want to take Replenishment of War, which is another very solid feat that can give you some extra temp HP to tank a little bit more on the offside. But I really like Defensive Recovery. It just really boosts all of our stats. And if there's an enemy with a particularly nasty save-based like condition, this can also help us or even an ally. Again, another flexible one that can be used on an ally, but even if we're using it on ourselves, it's just making us all the harder to kill. And probably by this point in the game, our GM is pulling their hair out because they just cannot threaten our character whatsoever. Now, level 14, we're taking Channeling Block. Now, this one is really, really cool, though I think a lot of people don't like it because they misunderstand its general purpose. So, Channeling Block, what it does, it allows us to expend a heal spell whenever we use our shield block reaction to increase the hardness of our shield by a D8 per spell rank of the expended heal. With our healing font at this level, level 14, that's 7d8 hardness we can throw onto our shield at any moment. The biggest part of this is rather than healing, we're mitigating damage, which means we don't have to spend necessarily actions on our next turn healing and can instead either, buff ourselves or use a, multiple attacks or trip the enemy or, all those kind of things. This just cleans up our action economy, but even better, if it's a really rough fight, this essentially allows us to get the benefit of our healing slots twice in a round rather than typically just one, because now we get to mitigate a bunch of damage, and then on our turn, if we're still missing health, we can use recovery or restorative strike to gain some HP back, essentially allowing us to double up on the effective healing or damage mitigation of a round. Insanely good. Now, you are going to want to have some extra spell slots dedicated to healing spells, and that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later here in the build, but still, this is going to make you impossible to kill, and it really will help preserve your shield even better, which is even more of a thing, especially if you don't have an easy way to repair your shield in the field. This is just another way to help maintain that part of the aspect, but you can't die. You just can't. You are doing so much to mitigate and heal yourself over the course of the combat while simultaneously striking the enemies with your weapon, buffing yourself, or like we have so much really good action economy that channeling block is just, it makes a lot of sense for the build because it just further enhances what we're already doing on our turns. Also, I want to make special mention, I picked up Sacred Defense here at this point. If you're going into the religion skill, this is actually a really good skill feat to pick up. Sacred Defense gives us some extra temp HP as long as we spend an action and make a religion check with a base DC of 30, which you do need to be master at this point to select anyway. That's really not going to be that hard for us to achieve. And if we know we're about to go into a combat, we can get 5, even 10 temp HP going into that. And if we get legendary in our religion, we can bump those numbers by +5, making our first round of combat even less likely to need to heal so that we can spend our turns buffing or doing whatever. It's a really, really good skill feat, one I definitely don't recommend overlooking, and you can do this once per hour. So a really good feat to have, especially when you know you're about to go into combat. But even in combat, it can be a way to give yourself some extra temp HP so that when you use something like channeling block, you can negate some extra damage on top of that. It's really, really good. Now, I got to admit, level 16 is more of a free slot. I selected Eternal Blessing because now we just always have a status bonus to hit at any point in the game. And we are now currently already expert in our weapon, but we won't be master until level 19. So we're going to be a little bit behind our allies, but not by a lot. And Eternal Blessing also benefits our allies as well, making them stronger and putting us up to a level of a martial without a buffing caster. Pretty solid, honestly, but you could select anything you really wanted in this one. And if you're using a spell like Heroism on yourself, which is one I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit, you really don't need Eternal Blessing, but I like it in particular. What I like about it the most is it allows you to be more selfish with your spell slots and everything like that, while also still benefiting your teammates around you, which I think is just a really good part of this build. It's a build that lets you support the team and really emphasize teamwork while having a lot of selfish practice in it. It's a very strong build for that reason. Now, at level 18, I really have to laugh because we get Divine Apex. Now, Divine Apex is such a good feat for the simple reason that we're boosting our strength up until this point. Oh, right, I totally forgot. Level 15, we'll talk about Divine Apex here in a second. Level 18 or 15, for our stat boost, we're going to do Strength, Constitution, and Wisdom again, but whatever our extra stat we've been leveling up until this point, in my build, it was Dex. You're going to want to invest in the other skill. Probably not Intelligence, but maybe Intelligence, depending on what ancestry you pick, because you're going to get a wasted stat boost if you just invest in the same 4 over and over. You'll end the game with one stat kind of half leveled, essentially. So if you put it in Charisma, then your Charisma will end the game at +2, and you'll get a +4 in both your Wisdom and your Dexterity, which will be really, really good. But honestly, level 20, it doesn't really matter, honestly. Like, you're not going to play level 20 character for all that long. So an additional stat boost, especially one for a skill that you're not using in particular all too much, is really not a bad deal. So if you just want to do Dex again just to get a higher reflex save, do it. It really doesn't matter. You're not going to play level 20 for all that long. But if you are, then, I've told you because I have a friend who would absolutely hate to waste a stat boost. So here we are. Efficiency. And speaking on efficiency, let's talk about Apex or Divine Apex. So Divine Apex is really good because our allies who are going to have a +6 at level 20 with their strength, we get a little bit earlier, which means at level 18, we are striking the same amount as our allies. Pretty cool. And next level, we actually get to be one step up because we get master weapon proficiency. So end game, Cleric, War Priest Cleric actually has a better 2-hit than most martials besides the fighter. It's insane. So Divine Apex is really good. You could also put it in Constitution and get a bunch of HP, or you can give this to an ally if you're feeling particularly generous, allowing them to get an Apex item to boost their stat, which is also really, really good. In any regard, Divine Apex is just an incredibly solid pick, and honestly, it's really where the build really ends. Level 20, I selected here the Spell Shape channel. It's really good. It allows us to use those one-action Spell Shape feats that we selected earlier as a free action instead. Very solid, increases our action efficiency even more on our turn, but you can kind of just take whatever. This build is good. You can walk up to the face of the most powerful demons, tank their shit, and be able to deal it back. Divine Weapon will do the spiritual damage that's sanctify, meaning it will do extra damage to the enemy more often than not. You are impossible to kill. You're a great bulwark. And at any point, if the enemies decide they want to target your allies instead of you because you're a regenerator tank, essentially, you can just heal them. And it works just as well. There's no way the enemy can really deal with you without doing massive area damage to multiple allies or threatening multiple allies at the same time. And, hopefully your allies can kind of hold their own as well. So, this build is really good. If you want to play a true War Priest, this is legitimately the build to do it. It's really, really good. So I did talk about spells earlier. So let's talk about some of the spell choices I made in my build. First of all, in the early parts of the game, level 1 to 4, give or take, you're not going to need much extra healing. Your Divine Font is really going to do that for you. So taking Bless in all your available spell slots is just good. You just pop it, you get a bonus to hit, very solid, and it's very good to go. Also, as you get higher in level, I recommend adding healing spells to each of your spell ranks, at least one healing spell per spell rank, so that you can give yourself optimal healing, not overhealing. When you overheal, which you'll very typically do with your Divine Fonts, because your Divine Font is always going to be at your highest spell rank, so it's always going to be a lot of HP, but maybe you don't need a lot of HP. Maybe you just need a little bit and you want to kind of just keep topped up. You can use like a second rank heal to do that little bit, not overheal and waste healing potential, and boom, you're good to go. Also, another really good spell is Heroism. Heroism is insanely good because not only does it give a status bonus to hit, but it also gives a status bonus to skill checks. And if you're using the Warhammer, as I mentioned with Torag, that means our high athletics, which we have in this build, is much easier to shove enemies with or trip enemies if you have a trip weapon instead. So Heroism is really good. Heroism also makes the difference between yourself and a martial. Once you get the 6th rank heroism, you are the same as a martial if you buff yourself. And thanks to Zealous Rush, you can still move after casting heroism on yourself and Divine Weapon to then strike an enemy and deal extra damage, meaning that more or less, once you hit like level 11, you're just slightly better than other martials, except, and of course, they'll have unique strikes that do more damage than you typically, but like the 2 hits and your healing capability and everything, they're going to struggle to keep pace with your character, which is, I know, what a lot of people really want. So yeah, by level 10, by level 11, this build is really pretty set for the rest of the game. And it gets even better when you get the 3rd rank or the 9th rank of heroism, because you can even be one step above, and that stacks with Apex Weapon, as I mentioned before. So those are the only spells you need to worry about. Also, don't worry about any spells that use spell DCs or spell attack rolls. That's not your strong suit, and we're sacrificing that spell casting capability to be a war priest. So if you wanted to be a more of a caster, don't be a war priest. Do something like a magus instead, or something like that. It's honestly more worth it for us to focus on spells that don't require saves or attack rolls. You could still use those, and don't get me wrong, you can always use those, especially on weaker enemies. And if your GM is a good GM, they're throwing combats with mixed levels of enemies. Some enemies are higher level, some enemies that might be a little bit lower level, and it's on those lower level enemies that your spells will work just as effectively. So, just something to keep in mind for our spell selection. Now, let's talk about the free bonus archetype rule. So the bonus archetype rule, if you're unfamiliar, it's something a lot of tables use, gives you additional feats every odd even level, there you go, that you can have archetype feats in specifically. It's an optional rule, one that I particularly like, but I know most tables do it, so my builds don't inherently include these, but I will recommend some archetypes for you to add to this build if you are using the free archetype rule. You don't need it, the build is already pretty perfect as is, but free archetype is perfect for enhancing what your character can already do. And speaking about what you're enhancing what your character already does, Bastion is my #1 pick. I use Bastion a lot in these kind of videos because it's just so good. This is a sword and board style of build, so we're going to be using a shield a lot. So an entire archetype dedicated to using shields is just really, really good. It gets extra effectiveness out of our shield and allows us to do extra things with our shield hand, which is also very solid. Next up as well is Medic. I already mentioned Medicine being kind of big in this build because we have Battle Medicine that can allow us to heal and treat our allies between combats or even a little bit in combat without expending our precious healing font or spell slots in general for our own uses. Medic just further enhances that, making you really, really good at healing your allies without needing to resort to your healing font or your spell slots. So another really good choice, though you could also go the optional route of the Blessed One and just gain the Lay on Hands focus spell. We don't have focus spells in this build otherwise, so getting a really good build based on Lay on Hands, even though this Blessed One is been changed a little bit, thanks to Player Core 2, it's still really good and offers a lot of healing. So I definitely would recommend one of these two. In addition to that, for my final recommendation, I'm going to recommend either the Fighter or the Champion class archetypes. Fighter, if you want some unique strikes that you can use without expending spell strikes, or spell slots like Restorative Strike does. Really, really good to give you some more offensive martial capability in your build, or just give you some more things you could do with your shield. There's a lot of good bully feats in the Fighter, for instance, for that. Or we can go Champion and make our GM absolutely hate our guts, because in addition to everything, we can just get the Champion's reaction and mitigate damage a ton to other people like we can do for ourselves. And because of our build already, we can mitigate so much damage against ourselves. The extra ability to mitigate damage to our allies will vastly increase your team's overall survivability. So Champion is insanely good, and Champion got some other really good feats that stack really well with this kind of playstyle of being a frontline divine kind of caster martial character. So really, really good multi-class archetypes. This build is really, really solid. You are going to be unstoppable. You could march into the depths of hell and come out unscathed. It's just that good. Now, as far as ancestry and versatile heritage choices, I'm going to mention Dwarf. Dwarf absolutely is really good for this build. One, because the Torag is a really good god for this build in particular, and there's already that connection for lore-wise. But more importantly than that, Dwarf feats give you a lot of general, like, tankiness, survivability, or the ability to, like, improve your gear, which is really good, and it can help increase our general martial proficiency. Also, there's just a wide variety of good dwarf feats to let us use like different kinds of weapons, or to give our allies special benefits, or to avenge our allies if any of our allies go down. It's just dwarfs very, very solid. But for another ancestry I'm going to recommend as well, I'm going to recommend the Yaksha. This is from the Tiansha character guide, so if you have access to that, great. The Yaksha is a really fun ancestry. I really love it. I've been playing it myself currently in our own Kingmaker game, and it gives us some stat boosts that we really want. It gives us Constitution and Charisma with a dump stat and Intelligence, which we don't really need for this build anyway. So Strength obviously would be what you would put in that slot. But Yakshas are really cool. They already have edicts and the need to like do benevolent things. So that works perfectly for kind of like our pseudo paladin build that we're already going for. But they also have a lot of really cool feats for like helping them resist elemental damage, or just there's all kinds of really cool things in the Yaksha. I made a video based on it, by the way. Please go check it out. And speaking on like plugging the channel a little bit, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like. That really helps tabletop. The more likes we get on tabletop based content, the more tabletop based content we're going to see on YouTube, which will get more people into tabletop. That's my #1 goal. So anytime you're watching a tabletop video, try to leave a like if you can. It really does help. And if you like my content specifically, subscribe. I cover things from Paizo to like typically a week or so early before it actually releases to the general public. So if you want to see any new stuff first, this is definitely a channel to be on. And as well, I cover variety tabletop in addition to Paizo products. So if you want to find out about other really cool games on the channel, like Lancer, Fabula Ultima, or we're even doing a live play of Mutants and Masterminds right now, then definitely I recommend subscribing to the channel. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I hope you all have a good time with the build. Bye.